So, as we think about young people in particular, we'll, for the purposes of this, we'll say that these are folks who are high school age. Maybe they're in college. Maybe they're just recently graduated from school. What we hear is that this is a generation coming up that is less interested in religion than any prior generation. But I have heard anecdotally from others that, in fact, this is a generation that maybe doesn't have the same level of connection as others before it, and they're seeking it. And perhaps church communities can be resurrected by this generation as a way of solving their lack of community. What's your view on what to expect from this next generation? Are we going to continue the trend of less formal, organized religious engagement, or do you think we're in at some point turn a corner and see more?
I think both are possible. A lot is going to depend on what the next 10 to 15 years look like. Because what we have right now is still some level of awareness of church attendance and church communities, some level of familiarity with Christian ideas. And I mean, even in the dechurching data that they had, one of the questions they asked people who have dechurched is, what would it take for you to go back? And a lot of people, it was as simple as being invited back, was all it would take to get them to return. So I think there's a possibility that there could be a resurgence. There's also a very good possibility that as you lose 40 million people, just speaking in kind of brass tacks terms, as you lose the money that 40 million people can provide, and this is not, I'm not talking about losing the money that pays for the pastor's mansion. I'm talking about losing the money that pays for the guy who does funerals and visits people in the hospital, or losing the money that pays for, maybe helps pay for the laundromat that the church has open for people in the neighborhood to use. When you lose those kind of resources and those staff positions, it gets harder to then engage with people. And so it could just become a kind of slow decline from here. I do think the thing that's interesting with the Zoomers compared to the millennials is that I think for the millennials, there was a sense of kind of, we were told what kind of sequence to follow to have a successful life. And a lot of us tried it and it just didn't work because finding a person to marry was much harder, or we took on tons of debt to go to college after every adult in our lives told us we had to go. And now you're burdened with a really hard economic position trying to service all that debt. So the millennials had a kind of track they were put on that just didn't work very well for a lot of them. Whereas for the Zoomers, it seems to be there's just not really a track at all. And you're just kind of sent out into the world to explore and make the best of it. And so I think there could be some opportunity there with Zoomers that isn't there for millennials, precisely because they're starting from a very different place. I think that the downsides to where they're coming from could be quite a bit worse than what the millennials have seen. But there's probably also a much higher ceiling for those folks than there are for millennials. Or that's kind of my like spitballing take. But I mean, it's based on some conversations I have and what I've read of different research. So yeah, it's possible. I think there's still, people are still kind of wrapping their heads around the fact that the country is changing so much, it's secularizing so quickly, and so there's still a kind of, maybe not the best metaphor to use, but fog of war phenomenon where people are kind of trying to figure out what's going on and what's coming next.